TV Crazy Man here. In this video we look at superhero special effects from the early days of the 40s to the 1970s with Kirk Alyn's Superman, George Reeves, Tom Tyler's Captain Marvel, the Six Men Are Man, Incredible Hulk, Wonder Woman, and lots more. Now let's start out with the 1941 Captain Marvel movie serial that was actually well ahead of its time. Now there has been some confusion about Captain Marvel's name. In the 70s, the book and the show was named Shazam, but the character was still Captain Marvel. Then decades later they named the character Shazam, and recently they renamed him to the Captain. In some scenes, actor Tom Tyler, who played Captain Marvel, was connected to wires. They simply projected the sky behind him and used a wind machine to flap his cape around. The other method was to use a large 7-foot long dummy made of paper mache, weighing only 15 pounds, attached to long strings. They would slide the dummy along the strings. If the dummy needed to fly upwards, the dummy would be slid backwards, and then they would reverse the film so that it would look like it was flying up. There was an episode of Shazam from the 1970s Saturday morning show that used a similar looking dummy to make it appear that Captain Marvel was landing a plane. Could it be the same dummy, or maybe a relative? You know, some of the flying scenes from the Shazam series were actually pretty advanced looking for Saturday morning television, especially at that time. Of course, they had to be creative with their limited budget. In this scene, when Captain Marvel saves a boy from drowning, he doesn't simply grab the kid and fly off in the air. He has to propel himself across the water as if he's flying in the water. You can see Jackson Bostwick is holding a bar, probably attached to a boat that's dragging him across the water. I actually had the good fortune to meet Jackson Bostwick several years ago at a small comic book convention. There was like hardly anyone there, and he took the time to talk to me, which was amazing to me to get to actually have a conversation with Captain Marvel himself. Stuntman David Sharp was the human part of the equation. Dressed as Captain Marvel, he would leap from a high point as if he were flying, and then he would roll with his landing at the very last second. He performed other stunts as well, such as backflipping and knocking down bad guys. I think David Sharp would have been an awesome Spider-Man. Now let's jump ahead to 1948 when Superman was played by Kirk Alyn. In Chapter 2, the first Superman serial, the first appearance of Superman has him holding a broken rail together so the train containing Lois and Jimmy can pass safely. Now don't brush this scene off as no big deal. You see, the amazing part is that the special effect here is really Kirk Alyn himself. Now Kirk Alyn once said in an interview that he actually knelt down by the railroad track while a real train whizzed by for this scene. There's a couple of times in these serials where Superman stops a train that are worth looking at. I wouldn't call them mistakes by the way they accomplished this trick, because there was literally no other way to do it back then, I wouldn't think. But it's easy to see how they accomplished these scenes. As you can tell, it's a film in front of Kirk Alyn, and then they switch to a real train that is completely stopped. By the 70s, Christopher Reeve Superman had a train running over the top of him. Interestingly enough, in what I assume is a studio shot, the background is nothing more than a painting. The wide shot is likely just a model of a train going by. Another train scene I've always loved is the one where young Clark Kent outruns the train in Superman the movie. To get the effect that they wanted, they actually used an overhead crane that was moving along to drag him at the speed they wanted and not have his feet touch the ground. Alyn was in top physical condition. Apparently most of the time Alyn had to carry real people and make it look effortless. There's at least once I noted that when Kirk Alyn is carrying somebody out, it's actually a dummy, or two dummies. Unless it's just one dummy and one real person. Sometimes it's hard to tell. Sometimes in old movie serials, when they had a stunt that a stuntman just wouldn't want to do, they just used a dummy. Speaking of dummies. As far as the Superman flying scenes and the way they use 2D animation instead of wires or something similar, it is tempting to question their choice here. But you get used to it. And for the kids that were watching at the theaters back then, must have seemed like a neat combination of live action and the comic book Superman come to life. The scenes do actually flow well together. You do notice that Superman is always landing behind a rock or something to hide the transition. sometimes from cartoon to live actor, not always though. As for why they used animation, Kirk Alyn said in the interview that they tried to use wires, but they couldn't get it to where you couldn't see them. In the second serial, they did start to do like close-ups of Alyn where he's standing with smoke clouds and fans going to make it look like he was flying. And they did this in addition to the animated Superman flying. They use a cartoon for just a split second whenever Superman crashes through cave walls, which has perplexed me as to why they needed to do that. After all, George Reeves bursting through fake walls turned out to be the best effect for that show without any animation needed. And the interesting thing is that when Kirk Alyn comes out the other side, it's actually him and not a cartoon. I guess I just have a tendency to ask why about everything. For bullets bouncing off Superman's chest, they actually just used animated bullets, which looks pretty good actually. Simple but effective. It's like Superman's version of the trick shot. Whenever you see a shot like this in an old movie, you gotta ask yourself one question: where's the dashboard? In the first couple of seasons of The Adventures of Superman starring George Reeves, they experimented with hanging Reeves on wires, which looks pretty cool even if you can see the wires pretty easily today. Maybe not so much on small blurry TV screens of the 50s. At some point Reeves got hurt and they started gravitating away from wires. In this scene, Reeves is clearly replaced by a stuntman using wires. Now later on they relied mainly on Reeves leaping on springboards to simulate him taking off in flight. You can see in the episode The Evil 3, the springboard is actually visible when Reeves leaps off into the air. Techniques for landing involve Reeves jumping off a ladder or holding an off-camera horizontal bar and swinging down in the frame. Eventually they came up with a cool wireless solution where Reeves could lay on sort of a pan with a pole sticking out that could be manipulated by men out of the frame to move Reeves around as he was supposed to be flying. In the episode Czar of the Underworld, in every scene where Superman is seen carrying this mobster, it's quite obvious that it's just a dummy. This is most apparent when he carries him into the building and hits the dummy's head against the door. I'm sure George Reeves could have lifted the guy, but you know, he's Superman. He has to make it look easy. In the very first episode, Superman saves a man that's falling to his doom. The man's played by Dabbs Greer, who played on The Lost and Prairie as the preacher. Imagine if the actor would have landed in Reeves' arms instead of the lightweight dummy that they used, while Reeves was in a contraption similar to this. I say similar because this was the very first episode, and they may not even have progressed to that level yet. But if you do look closely, you can see that there's something flat on Reeves' chest. So there's definitely a board or something holding Reeves up in the air, something similar to this contraption. By the 70s, when they were shooting the first two Superman movies, they relied heavily on wires again. But they were a bit more advanced. In this scene from Superman 2, they actually had a cameraman on wires flying along the Kryptonians in the air. In the early 80s, the Greatest American Hero TV show had the benefit of being able to use a lot of the same previous techniques already used to make Superman and Captain Marvel fly. You can see George Reeves' influence with the classic run and jump into the air for takeoffs, and they even use springboards. But they added a new trick when they used a stuntman to skydive with a parachute to do one flying scene. You know, the art of filmmaking is a lot like a magic trick, combining scenes to create an illusion. Take the 1966 Batcave. The inside was nothing more than a set. When we see the Batmobile take off, it has to stop because there's likely nowhere for it to go. You can even see the shadow of the car come to a halt. But what we were meant to focus on was the Batmobile exploding out of the Batcave, which was an actual cave in Griffith Park.
But that's impossible! Holy resourcefulness!
Of course, one of the biggest special effects was the use of stuntmen to get shots that actors just weren't capable of pulling off without getting injured. But the trick was, of course, you needed to make sure the stuntman looked as much like our hero as possible. In this scene, someone forgot to ask the stuntman to shave off his mustache. it kind of makes him look more like Alfred disguised as Batman than actually Batman. In the episode Holy Rat Race, when Batman and Robin run around the corner while pursuing Falseface, there is an obvious stunt double for Robin. Why did Burt Ward need a stunt double to run around the corner? Of course, by the 1960s, they were still not above using dummies at times instead of stuntmen.
Holy hoodwink.
On the 60s Green Hornet TV show, Kato hits a button and within a few seconds replaces Britt Reed's car with Black Beauty. But after studying this scene, I believe they use model cars, but it is very convincing. Before CGI Hulk of the modern era, way back in the 70s and 80s, our generation had the real Hulk, Lou Ferrigno. He was the biggest special effect the show had. All they had to do was put some makeup on him, which of course took a lot longer than you might imagine, and sometimes it got all over the place, especially when the makeup got wet, but Lou was real at least, and it didn't feel like you were watching a high-priced video game.
No, he's gotten out.
Check out Lou's green handprints on the door. Sometimes part of the costume for Lou Ferrigno was tights on his feet. Looked kind of like socks.
Don't tick me off, Wonder Woman.
You know, I always wanted to see this team up, but with the green makeup, not without. Wonder Woman's powers looked pretty awesome back in the day, but without today's CGI computer graphics, they had to do special effects in very interesting and creative ways. You see, Lynda Carter did the bullets and bracelets trick by holding a remote in her hand that controlled the flashes we were supposed to think were bullets hitting her bracelets. Wonder Woman used her magic lasso to rope the bad guys when she didn't feel like running after them, which looked good most of the time, but here in this first season episode, the crooks are running full blast, arms are swinging, and then right before they get lassoed, they look like a couple of old guys running, barely moving, and their arms are tucked in so the lasso will go over them. Well, I mean, for her to get the lasso over both of them, they had to be running close together, so we had to suspend disbelief, I guess, a little bit. Now, one trick they used to do back in the day to make it look like a superhero was leaping up a tall building was to have a stunt person jump out backwards and then they just would reverse the film. Wonder Woman also had her tiara, which could be thrown at the bad guys and would return like a boomerang. Not sure why they put Lynda indoors for the close-up throw. If you look to your right of the screen, you can see Lynda's shadow on the studio wall behind her. Of course, we can't forget the invisible plane, even if we can't see it. Sometimes you could tell they used dolls inside a toy airplane to create the shot of the invisible plane. In this scene, you can see the mattress the stunt people land on pop out through the doorway for a second. And if you look at the shadow on the floor, you can see the moment the stunt people are landing on it. Now, I bet you're wondering what in the world could have been wrong with this transformation scene. Well, every now and again, when Diana Prince does her transformation into Wonder Woman, things in the background appear and then they disappear. In this case, it was the trash can. Yeah, it's pretty obvious in these transformation scenes that some time has passed between the time that Diana starts her turn and the time that Wonder Woman appears. Who knows, it could be a day or a week later. Well, probably more like a couple of days, a day at max, or at least several hours. Maybe it was lunch break. I'm not sure. Now in the second season episode, The Deadly Toys, Wonder Woman is shown lifting up the back of a van as the bad guy tries to speed off. But just for a second, if you look closely, you can see that the van is actually jacked up in the back. And back then they would use rolling tables to make lifting heavy people look effortless for Wonder Woman. Now look really closely towards your right at the man's hand and you'll see the edge of the table. This one I think is really interesting. On the second season episode, The Bionic Woman Part 2, during the scene where Jamie and Steve are jumping over a fence, we see a ladder at the corner of the picture. that, according to the DVD commentary by Kenneth Johnson, was placed there so that they could jump off of it, thus creating the illusion of jumping over the fence. I think I would have been crushed to know this particular trick as a kid back in the 70s. In Season 3's The Deadly Test, there's this really cool scene where the 6-Man man throws a rocket at a van with a bad guy in it. But if you look really closely, you can see that the rocket is actually on a visible wire as it heads towards the van before it explodes. In Season 4's Death Probe Part 1, the probe attacks a farmer. The farmer shoots at the probe and then does what people always do in old movies when they run out of bullets. They throw the gun at the monster or Superman or whoever it is instead of reloading it. The probe grabs the shotgun and then starts to turn it. It's then we see what looks to be a gloved hand helping the probe's arm turn. Look at the bottom right and we'll slow it down so you can see it a little bit clearer. Comment, let me know what you thought in the comments, because that's where you put the comments. Yeah. TV Crazy Man here. In this video we look at superhero movie serials, and no we don't. Okay. With Kirk Alyn's Superman and Tom Tyler's Captain Marvel. TV Crazy Man here. In this video we look at and Wonder Woman of the 70s and every superhero in between. You know, like Batman, Adam West, all of that. TV Crazy Man here in this video, and let me know what you thought in the video. Let me know what you thought of the video in the comments.
Poor devil. Feel it's my duty not only to catch him, but with all the medical know-how at our command, to help that sorry creature back to a normal way of life.
Well, anyway. Oh, one last thing. If you haven't seen my video on the most beautiful superhero women of classic TV, check that out. And if you want a good laugh, then check out my video on Dobie Gillis. If you've never heard of Dobie Gillis, boy, are you in for a treat. Thank you so much for watching. Please subscribe if you haven't already. If you have, thanks. And hit the bell so you don't miss any future videos. Please comment. Let me know what you thought of this video. Y'all have a great day.
You don't say. You don't say.
Who was it?
He didn't say.